Ami, we talked last week, James spoke about the kerfuffle over the proposed changes to the voting laws in Georgia. You did a terrific film where you actually went around, we'll look at it in a second, where you spoke to people to find out if they actually knew what those laws were all about. Ami Horowitz, how are you? Great to see you.
I'm doing well. It's such a pleasure. A little offended you preempted me for Prince Philip. I mean, he's not even technically a royal, right? I mean,
yeah, right? But he's an outsider, Ami. This is the point. He was an outsider royal,
nice.
So he's different. He's different to all the others. But listen, so I just want to play your film, set up the film, and then we'll play it for us.
Sure. So I went to this is actually an older video that I re-released because it's so relevant about this debate, this weird debate about voter ID laws. And the left is against voter ID laws and never understood totally why they're against it. So I went to Berkeley, the University of California, Berkeley, and I asked them, why are you against it? And they, in the video, they explained it quite well.
Let's have a look.
Voter ID laws?
Yeah, they're usually pretty racist. I think voter ID laws are a way to perpetuate racism.
Would you go as far as say those laws are racist?
For sure.
Do you think it suppresses the African-American vote?
Definitely, because they're less likely to have state IDs.
These type of people don't live in areas with easy access to DMVs or other places where they can get identification.
Do you think that's harder for black people to go online?
Well, I feel like they don't have the knowledge of how it works.
Do you carry ID?
Yes, I do.
Do you know any black person who doesn't carry ID?
No.
Do you have ID?
Yes.
Because I have my ID and my friends have their ID, so like, we know what we need to carry around.
Everybody that I know have ID. Like, that's one of the things you need to walk around with New York with.
I heard a lot also that black people can't figure out how to get to the DMV.
Really?
What does that say to you?
I know it's on 25th Street.
Do you know where the DMV is, Ryan?
It's on 125th Street.
So, Ami, tell us the story. So basically how these new laws suggest, or various Democrats suggested, that black people don't actually know how to get ID or where to go for it. And you were challenging all of that. So tell us the background to it first.
Yeah, if you would let me indulge in a personal story, the reason why I made that video on voter ID laws is because my father passed away. About 8 or 9 months later, I went to vote in a general election. When I went to vote, and in California, everybody's listed in alphabetical order, so it's all the Horowitzes in a row. I went to vote, and I went to sign my name next to my name in the printed rolls, and I noticed somebody had signed my dad's name and crossed it out. I said, what is going on here?
Jesus.
And I asked the guy running, he goes, you don't need ID, so he just gave me his name, and I let him vote. And then this is a demonstrable example of voter fraud, right? Because they say voter fraud doesn't exist. Well, it happened to me. So if it happened to me, it happened to other people. So I thought to myself, how ludicrous it is not to have voter ID. So there it is. You can see the condescension of the left when it comes to how they view black people. In my view, it's soft racism. It is the bigotry of low expectations. Did you hear the words they used? They don't have the knowledge. They don't know where. They don't have. It's incredible the language they use when it comes to define the people they're purportedly there to help, black people. And when you ask black people about it, they look at me like I'm crazy. What do you mean I don't have ID? What do you mean? I mean, it's ridiculous. And by the way, if you ask black people, and I asked them in the video, and also if you polled them like they do, the vast majority of all black people have no problem whatsoever in showing ID. It's a manufactured controversy in order for the left to create a wedge. And what I think the left wants conflict between the races, and that's why they're doing this.
Rita.
Oh, I just can't believe that there's controversy wanting people to have the same credentials they need to get a library card to be able to vote. I mean, the whole thing is crazy. But James and I were in the US for the election, and we spoke to these same sort of young people from university lining up to vote in Pittsburgh, and every single one of them said the biggest issue in America is institutional or systematic racism. But yet when you ask them to give you some examples, none of them could. So where is this culture coming from? Where is this thought process coming from those young people? Not only the bigotry of low expectations, but this belief, this ardent belief that America is systematically racist and it's the greatest crisis facing the country. Where is that coming from?
one of the most insidious parts of the left is their need to change language and for language to always evolve and change and essentially take all meaning away from words, right? That's what they always do. And probably the most terrible, the most insidious of all the words they want to change is racist. They've made everything racist, which in fact makes nothing racist, right? And racism isn't static at all. It used to be that if you said person of color, you are a racist. If you don't say person of color now, you are a racist. It used to be if you said, oh, I don't see race, you are not a racist. And now if you say, I don't see race, you are a racist. Are you following me? Of course you're not, because the whole thing is stupid.
Brilliant. James.
But, Ami, this stuff has real-world consequences. The baseball all-star game has been moved out of Atlanta because of this, and yet that's going to have huge consequences in a city that has a huge minority population. A lot of businesses are going to suffer. How is it that politicians from Stacey Abrams to Joe Biden can get away from basically blatantly lying about something happening when it's not, and all of these corporations? Because I think, we've talked about this, these C-suites, these CEOs, these corporate affairs people, they bear an awful lot of responsibility for what's going on, don't you think? Absolutely.
Now Joe Biden and the Democrats, frankly, have lied repeatedly about this Georgia law, right? Because, again, they're trying to create a race conflict. Joe Biden said, talking about denuding the power of words, he said that this Georgia law was Jim Crow on steroids. Not just Jim Crow on steroids. For those of you in Australia who don't know, and you wouldn't know, what is Jim Crow? Jim Crow were Southern laws in Southern states which stated that black people couldn't sit in the same restaurant as white people. Black people couldn't drink from the same water fountain as white people. True and unadulterated racism. And to call a law, which, by the way, I don't think the law is restrictive enough. I think, frankly, it's too easy to vote. And by the way, the Democrats want to make it super easy to vote. Just walk down the street and have people raise their hands. I mean, I don't understand all this garbage. But no, they totally lie about what this vote is in the most racist and despicable way. And again, all of it, it's all manufactured. It's all fake. And they're doing it because they want to create as much of a wedge as they can between races. Because when there's conflict, that's when they're able to say, hey, guys, we're the ones who will come in and calm things down. No, it's terrible what they're doing. Absolutely horrific.
Ami, you've mentioned your own experience of voter fraud. There's been a massive campaign in social media, big tech, the media, mainstream media, to suppress any questioning of the integrity of the vote last year. Has that been successful in the US? Have people just accept it and no questions? Or are there little corners where people go, still not sure about that vote?
Yeah, I think by and large, we've kind of moved on from that. I mean, obviously, there are some corners where people still have an issue with it. Look, my personal opinion is I don't think that there absolutely is voter fraud. Voter fraud exists. I saw it personally. Is there enough voter fraud at this point to flip an election? You have to show me the evidence. I simply did not see the evidence from the last election, and the president had opportunities to do so. If you showed me that there is in fact voter fraud, or in this past election enough to flip an election, then we've got a massive problem. But until I see that evidence, I can't say that it did. But what's funny is that the right is always calling for there's voter fraud, and the left calls for the opposite of that, which is voter suppression, which is an absolute myth, by the way. And this is all part of the wrapped into this Georgia law, where we're trying to suppress the vote, particularly suppress the vote of black people. And by the way, in Georgia, black people vote far in higher numbers as a percentage than the percentage of the population. So there's not actually voter suppression at all in Georgia. In fact, quite the opposite. And this law actually makes it easier and less restricted to vote. That's the irony behind the whole thing.
Rita.
And the great majority of Americans support voter ID laws. This is the crazy thing about this. Despite the media narrative, most Americans support it. But I want to go back to Biden and his race baiting. He has been guilty of this throughout the election campaign and now as president. Has there been any blowback? Has there been any criticism of him engaging in this dangerous rhetoric?
Not from the people who matter in this, which is obviously the mainstream media, and by the way, big tech as well. And you saw big tech ban the president, right, President Trump, but they've done nothing, despite the repeated lies, the most incendiary comments by the president, Jim Crow on steroids, so forth and so on. No, they haven't done anything to push back. Although I have to say this, his lies have been so obvious, so apparent that in some cases, even a place like the Washington Post or NBC, where they're no friend of Republicans, did in fact push back and say these things aren't necessarily true. So you see a little bit of pushback, but not in any way, shape, or form the level of vitriol you saw when it came to President Trump. With President Biden, it's see no evil, hear no evil.
Ami Horowitz, what do you think the next couple of years holds for Biden? Do you think the press will carry on just supporting pretty much everything, or do you think there will come a turning point?
Are you serious about that question, or was that a joke? No,
you answered it perfectly. Beautiful answer.
The press will be happy to carry his water throughout if he's able to finish out his term, the press will carry his water.